Hello, I'm Jared,
And I'm Ebony.
and this is his
And hers.
Warhammer 40k.
Yay! We're back. It's been a while.
Yeah, we took a little bit of a break to catch up on some other things.
Yep.
Life got busy, but we are back with our next book that we talked about, which is Assassinorum, Kingmaker,
And it was
by
awesome.
Robert Rath. Yeah, to say at the start, this book is excellent.
Yeah, I would give it a solid 9 out of 10.
Yeah,
That's real high
This
for
is
me.
so despite the criticisms I'm going to throw at it, this is a 9 out of 10 book. Easily the best book about Imperial Knights. Probably the best book about the Officio Assassinorum.
Yeah.
Like, it's incredible the work that he put into this. And in a way, it's not surprising. Like, The Infinite and Divine was both really good and a really interesting take on Necrons. Mm-hmm. And I think that same sort of, like, mindset is being used here as well.
Okay. Yeah, I like the Infinite and Divine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was super impressed with what we got here. It's basically...
Like a heist
It's a
movie.
heist movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is 3/4 a heist movie, 1/4 giant robot battles.
And like a little bit of political intrigue, like Game of Thrones style, thrown in there a little bit.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the gist is that the king of a night world, that is sort of, the Imperium is concerned about its allegiance, right? So it could be falling to chaos. It could be a little bit anti-Guilliman.
Oh no, it is actively anti-Guilliman.
I feel like the population is 50-50, but
no one cares about the population.
Fair.
The leaders are what matters.
The leaders are very...
A call went out for this world's knights to join the Indomitus Crusade.
And they were like, eh.
And they said no.
Yeah. So...
Not okay.
So the Assassinorum is going to fix that by combining 3 assassins together. And so we do get a little bit of vignette in the beginning from each of the major assassins.
I love the vignettes. You skipped over them.
We read them in the car as audiobooks, and I just didn't continue them in the book, but it's fine because that's the part of the heist movie where you meet George Clooney and see him.
You
on
assemble the
screen.
team.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I just kind of breezed through that.
So those are my favorite parts. So okay. I really enjoyed that. We assemble the team. We start with our Vindicare or Vindicare,
which is how they're saying it.
As the audiobook kept saying. I strongly disagree, but okay. Before we get into that, speaking of the audio, I just wanted to point out one special thing. So a lot of books that have been coming out recently for 40K have a dramatis personae attached to them. Mm-hmm. And when you read the audios, the dramatis personae gets skipped. Okay, that makes sense. Mm. This book, in addition to a dramatis personae, has an Imperial Knight classification page, which lists every single
that was weird
type of knight with all of the equipment that they can have.
It was like 35 minutes.
This was not skipped over by the audio, which was really weird.
I was just like, oh, okay, that's happening.
I've never seen that before. It was kind of funny.
Useful information, I guess.
It's a bit like if you had an audiobook reading, the appendix at the end.
It was weird.
Yeah. Anyway.
The team.
The team. So we start with Absalom Rath.
That's a great name. I just have to pause there. Yeah. That is the best main character name. I love it.
It's pretty wonderful. It has his strong main character energy.
Yeah.
Throughout this is the kind of book where you really think about which actors would be playing this in the movie version.
It's very
Oh
good.
my God, does this need a movie version?
I would watch this movie.
Yeah. Who is a Vindicare assassin on his 49th kill. We get this neat little bit of info where when assassin gets their 50th kill, they get moved to sort of the higher tier of assassins.
Which is more like desk duty?
Yeah, it's more about planning missions.
Yeah.
You get taken up by like Officio Centrum, like back on Terra.
Yeah. He's not that thrilled about it.
No. He wants to stay in the field.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to figure out a way around that as well. He's given this mission by the liaison, who doesn't have another name. He's just like the person who gives you your mission.
Liaison.
Yes.
It's like a mystery.
It is the liaison capitalized.
Yeah.
And the mission, as Eb said, is we're looking to assassinate this high king of a night world and replace him with someone else who's going to bring the night world to the Indomitus Crusade.
And do what Gilliman says.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Rath is given carte blanche to assemble his team. And he pulls in the Calidus Temple and the Vannis Temple. And the Calidus Temple, most people in 40K are familiar with. They're shapeshifters. They have a drug called polymorphine. Hilarious pun of a drug. And can use that to pretty much shapeshift
like
into anyone, and even like other Xenos.
Yeah.
Like there's stories of orcs and Eldar and other strange things.
Yeah, and that character is Sycorax, and
Sycorax.
she's pretty cool.
Yes. Sycorax is coming off of 3 consecutive missions.
Which is
without
bad.
a break. And
Yeah.
she is really not up for another, but she's kind of forced into it.
And they talk a little bit about her and Absalom about how, like, they need to take this polymorphine to be able to morph their features, but it develops a dependency. Like, you become addicted to it. And if you stop taking it, the withdrawal is turning into a puddle, and that sounds terrifying.
Yeah, your body just dissolves.
Yeah, which is not great. So, like, he's like, oh, you're a drug addict? And she's like, yes, and that's my job.
She's pretty cool. There's some great moments with her, I would say, and just getting into the mind of a Calidus assassin. Probably more than any of them. We really dig into the psyche of them.
Yeah, because she's very... I think the 3 assassins have different approaches to a job, and definitely Absalom Rath probably would do well planning missions. He's very into the planning and the exactness, right? And he is, in general, a sniper.
That is
right?
the Vindicare Temple.
Yeah, and Sycorax is all about being alone and doing it on her own, and improvisation, and occasionally changing her face, right? And so they immediately start clashing with each other, which is interesting.
Our third assassin is Avaris Cone, who is of the Vannis Temple. Now, I love the Vannis Temple. They do not get enough exposure. And in a way, they don't want the exposure, but they want everyone else's exposure. The Vannis Temple is all about information collection and using a world's weaknesses against itself.
Yeah.
To use a slight political mention, a Vannis assassin would have planned January 6th. They're the ones who will start up riots. They're the ones who will create accidents. They collect every bit of information that they can and use that to cause the systems that the world is built on
to malfunction in a way that meets their
to
goal.
Collapse in on itself.
Yeah.
Reminds me a little bit. Side note: we recently read the Alfarius Primarch book as well, and he makes a note of everything runs on systems.
Yeah.
And I think the Vannis Temple operates maybe the closest to that initial view that we see of him.
Exploiting an existing system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're all really strong characters and really cool, and they have interesting character arcs that you can see happening in the background. I know that you've read some of the prequel short stories for these characters,
yes.
And I didn't, but I didn't feel like I was missing sort of the central thesis of that character. I felt immediately at home.
Yeah, most of their like characterization is not in those short stories.
Okay.
Like it didn't click that these were the same characters for me until they started mentioning like those things. Missions.
Okay, so
like,
the short stories are about missions, less about the characters.
Yep.
And then the other half is about this night world and its crazy political situation.
Oh, it's so cool. Night worlds in general have previously been sort of superficially, feudal and knights and they say my lord and whatnot and they have squires. No, we're digging into like true British like royalty bloodline bullshit.
But this one's like interesting because there are two sort of royal family bloodlines, Striders and Rao, and the king always has to come from both, and they marry for political reasons, but even to make children, they decide that like these two will be your parents, and you will spend half your childhood in a Strider household and half your childhood in a Rao household, so that if you're in the list, which is the list of people to become king potentially, you are in theory neutral between Strider and Rao.
Correct. If you are on the list, you cannot have children of your own.
Yeah, because that would mean that a potential king had children, right? You would set up a line, so you must come from both houses, which is interesting, and their heraldry is interesting. It's like quartered Strider and Rao. It's really cool. And so our assassins have decided that they're replacing the king of this night world, whose name is Yavarius Cow.
Yavarius Cow. Which, when we first heard it on the audiobook, we kind of went back and forth on guessing how that was spelled. I think we were both totally wrong.
We were wildly wrong, both of us, yeah. And so they have an opportunity to replace him with someone who is on the list, but really low down on them, named Raken.
Right.
And so he's obviously both Strider and Rao, but they capture him on his way back from a mission?
They didn't so much as capture him. Like, he was in a war zone.
And he's on his way back.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, and they intercept him. And there's an interesting period of the book where they're trying to decide what they're going to do. Like, does Sycorax just replace him? But it's kind of hard to do that, having not done any background on this character that she wants to replace. And so Cohn comes up with the idea that, like, we just ask him to help us. Yeah. Because he doesn't have any strong allegiance to Strider or Rao, and he might hate Yavarius Cow.
Yeah. He actively hates the monarch and is happy to help them take it down.
Yeah, so now he's part of the team, which is pretty cool.
Yep. All the way there, Raken is working with Sycorax to sort of become him and learn the history of the world. But most interestingly, so Raken, he's not a knight pilot, he is an armiger pilot. Armigers were sort of a relatively new unit that act as the squires to knights. Knights on the tabletop were sort of a standalone unit. Like, you could have a knight army, but it was considered kind of ridiculous to have multiple of them in a battle. So instead you might have a knight and you might have 3 or 4 armigers now. And so we hadn't really seen much about the armiger. They work similarly, the main difference being the knight that an armiger is under, that pilot can
control the
psychically dominate the armiger pilot, and the magnitude of that varies by knight household. You know, some are pretty
intense,
sadistic with that.
And so Raken is teaching Sycorax to pilot his armiger, because also she has to fool his armiger, right?
Oh, that was so cool.
Which is very interesting, because she can look like him and probably physically pass a biological test of him, but she's got to put the helmet on and be him mentally, which is really tough. And it sort of works, but it doesn't really work. It works enough.
It works enough.
That she can pilot it, but she doesn't have sort of the nuance and ability that Raken has. Like, it's not natural to her, because she has to be constantly suppressing herself.
But I feel like that is almost a separate thing from the fact that every knight and armiger has the spirit or a copy of the spirit, like, it's sort of unclear, of every past pilot. And they form this almost council within they are the machine spirit of the knight. And they can have disagreements over how they feel about, the pilot and what they want to do with it. And so Sycorax is able to convince almost all.
There's one that's group. Like, no, this is an imposter, and the rest of them are like, you're always crazy. You say no to everything.
Right.
Which is interesting, because that machine spirit, like, quizzes her. That is also part of Raken's training of her, that, like, she must be able to recount these battles and these events that the armiger has been through with other pilots, right? And she has to be able to do it on the fly. And so there's a lot of great back and forth training between the two of them. And then he's like, show me how you do that thing where you look like other people. And she does it, and he like passes out because that's wild.
Yep.
Which I thought was pretty cool.
And all of this is really before we even get to
his homeworld.
The homeworld, which I'm forgetting the name.
I don't remember what
I don't remember the name of the world. But it is the home of House Strider Rao.
Yeah.
So Sycorax has to reintroduce herself, sort of say that, I've returned to the war zone. I want to serve the king.
Yeah. And she has to, getting him back into serving the king, he also has to have brought some sort of accolades to this night house. And so Cone sets up this whole like fake situation where like he saved someone in a war and it was great, so like they're happy to have him return. It would basically
be like if someone came to apply for a job and they came with like a recommendation from the president.
She set up this great thing and they're like, oh, that's amazing, it's great. And so the king is like, all right, you could serve the king, which is a thing you can do instead of remaining in the list and trying to become king or going off to battle for the night world. Like, you can stay at home and serve the king.
Or you can serve one of the two houses. Yes. Like, you can just say, like, I'm siding with one side or the other. Yeah. And people are kind of okay with it. Yeah. Kind of.
And the first test he has to pass, Sycorax has to pass as Raken, is Raken's mom.
Yeah.
Who is my favorite character.
She is how you want to act when you're not allowed to.
Yeah, she's great. There's this great line describing her that they're like, oh, if you ever want to just like strip the paint off of your knight, just stand it in front of her and let her curse at it for 10 minutes. It'll be stripped bare. She's like a really intense, like crotchety old matriarch, and I love it. Yep. She might be my spirit animal.
So they hatch this plan to ingratiate Sycorax / Raken into the service of one of the four, like, of the court.
Yeah, like the Grand Council of Yavarius court.
So the king has a personal bodyguard, a spy master, a chief executioner, and like a herald.
Yeah.
Like, these are the four like big names around them.
And so the herald is Akara.
Yep.
Which we get there and we discover that the king is always in his knight. And he never speaks. His herald speaks for him. Yeah. And that's a thing.
Which immediately is setting off alarm bells in me. Like that. Yeah. I will say the twists in this book, I did see them coming.
Yeah.
Like this was not a book that truly surprised me, I would say.
There was a twist I didn't see coming.
Okay.
Not that the king being in his knight and never coming out of it was immediately a red flag.
Yeah.
But I didn't know it was what it was. We'll get there. So there's Akara, who speaks for the king.
Yep.
There's Symphonia Dask, who is the spy master.
Right. And Dask sort of becomes not so much the bad guy, but like the main rival for our group.
Well, that's because she is competent at her job. And there's a great part of them setting up the plan where Absalom Rath is like, man, if she wasn't my rival, I'd have to tell her that I'm impressed with her competency, right? Like, she is good at her job, which is sort of protecting the king from this sort of ongoing, like, political intrigue system.
Yep.
So she's got spies everywhere, and all of the scenes with her are great. There is Yuma, who's his personal bodyguard.
Is the personal bodyguard, and that is who they end up ingratiating Sycorax with in order to get closer, basically through a series of like combat trials.
Yeah, he decides to be his squire.
Yeah,
right?
it's a tournament.
Yeah. Then there is Raken's mom, who is the head of House Strider. And then there is Crane, who's
Raken's uncle.
His uncle, who is the head of House Rao.
Yep.
And then there's Fontaine. There's this dude who isn't there.
Yeah, so Fontaine is the chief executioner, or what do they call him? Master of Judgment.
Yeah, and he's off fighting a war.
Yeah, there is sort of a occasional mention of the peasants are uprising, the peasants are unhappy. It's mentioned a few times. I don't know. I didn't. I see where it goes. I feel like it needed to be a little bit stronger on the start in order to show the payoff that we got for that.
Yeah.
But Fontaine doesn't show up until the very end.
Yeah. So then they're gonna have this big tournament. It's gonna be great. the king is going to parade his knights out, and then all of these sort of smaller knights and armigers are going to battle, and it's a big deal, and everyone is there from the town, and also our assassins are going to try and assassinate the king.
It wasn't planned to try and assassinate him.
Yeah, well, one of us decided they were assassinating them.
So the first sort of unplanned event is the peasant uprising.
Yeah.
You know, the peasants decide now is the time to strike. There's a big explosion, panic, people are running around.
Yeah, knights are firing into the crowd. It's pretty crazy.
Yep.
And Absalom is like, I guess we should kill this king now.
Yep.
And it's weird because Sycorax is like, what happened to all your planning? I thought improvisation was her. And he was like, well, sometimes you got to go on the fly. I learned from you.
He honestly, there's notes in this book of his obsession with getting the 50th kill. And it really shows in this part, I felt.
He's like, I'm going to do it.
Like, that was his whole driving force. That's why he went off script here, I feel.
And it's obviously hard to break into a knight, so like he's trying to get into the knight to get the king inside of it and kill it, and he gets inside there and twist,
the king's already dead.
Yep. And like real dead, like he's been dead for several weeks. But also this uprising is happening, and all of the peasants who are doing the uprising also now have seen someone just try to break into the knight and kill the king. So now everyone's trying to murder Absalom Rath. It is like melee on this giant battlefield, and he escapes. And now the whole of the world is in unrest, and so the sort of the High Council goes into conclave.
This I love this part too, because this is sort of like the heist movie montage near the end, where where they have to do like all the other competent stuff, you know, now that like the initial plan failed, so that they've developed a new plan, but they haven't told you this plan. You know, because in any movie, when they tell you a plan, it's going to fail. And when they don't tell you a plan, it's going to succeed.
And
that is what happens here, where basically the court is going down the list of like people to be the next king. Immediately followed by a vignette of that person being assassinated,
which is great.
Ways.
That is a great,
great,
because they're trying to make sure that they whittle this list down to Raken. Right. And so they're like this person, and then there's a vignette of that person getting murdered.
They don't whittle it down to Raken. Like they actually whittle it down to Dagger Crane, who is Raken's cousin,
who's the other Crane's son, right?
Yes. Who is very pro Imperium. Like he was sort of the point where they're like, okay,
we'll accept this.
He'll be fine.
And so those are all cool. There's lots of like little peeks into the other like sort of high lords on this world who are all kind of terrible people, so you don't feel that bad when they get murdered. And each assassin takes a different murder, and it's great. They have like a little bit of a roulette going on between them where they're like, no, I'll take this one. No, I'll take this one. And those are great. And we are skipping over a lot of the sort of like smaller battles and fights and things that are happening inside the castle after that initial finding out that the king is dead, that are all really good. So
they eventually murder off everyone higher on the list to get to Dagger Crane, who they consider to be an okay choice. A ceremony occurs. He gets bound to the Crown of Dominion, which is the Castellan class knight. You know, it's this
king's knight.
Massive thing. I've shown you a picture of it. Like, it's so much bigger than other knights. And then he immediately goes crazy and declares that Strider Rao is going to not only not join the Indomitus Crusade, but is going to join with
House Morvain,
which
they mention vaguely in the beginning as like this fallen knight house that I thought got banished from this world, but I guess not. They're back.
This needed
a little more backstory.
It needed more, similar to the peasant uprising. At the same time, like the fact that they just, I don't know exactly how to fix it. Yeah, this is the point. Like from this point until almost the end of the book, I was not into it.
You're over it.
I wasn't.
speaking of House Morvain, that dude Fontaine, who's been missing this whole time, is on his way back home to the castle with House Morvain, because also he's bad, and apparently everyone is evil and pro-chaos.
Yep.
Right? So now we're having this giant war. What we haven't talked about is that this whole time, even when Raken was teaching Sycorax to pilot his armiger, his dad died in battle, and like obviously they had tensions because you spend half your life in one house and half in the other. And his dad's last name is Fang, and his name, he doesn't have a hyphenated last name. He's not like Fang Strider. He's just Strider because his mom is a boss, but also because his dad wasn't that impressive, and so he spent his whole life thinking his father was kind of disappointed in him, and his mom thinks he's kind of a loser. And there's this ongoing question that his dad asks, like, you know, what does it mean to have your blood? Like, what is the purpose of piloting a knight or an armiger? And we find out that the answer to that question, so as part of explosions and fighting, Raken is running, and he ends up underneath a castle and finds a...
Well, he finds his father's tomb.
Yes.
Like, it's the
where his family
tomb.
yeah.
It is mentioned a couple times that, like, the Fang line is considered meh.
Yeah.
You know? Like,
right.
they've all piloted Jester,
yeah.
Which is the name of the armiger that Sycorax bound to, that Raken wore, that his father had.
But generally men, not like exceptional pilots or anything. And so he finds his father's tomb. He puts on his father's helmet. He answers this question, and surprise, there is a new knight there.
Leviathan, which is not a Castellan class. I forgot the exact name of it, but of the same type.
It's very large.
Like, generally knight houses have one of these.
Yeah. So it's huge, and it's been underground, and there is this whole sort of folklore around Leviathan, that like Leviathan rose up during the original...
The Knight Without a Pilot.
Yeah, and so no one knows who the pilot of Leviathan is. Turns out it was Raken's dad, and now it's Raken's. So it's a thing that has passed through his father's line.
The Fang line is secretly the pilot of Leviathan. And it's very much a sort of Superman Clark Kent sort of disguise to it, which I don't mind that. Like, I actually liked that quite a bit.
I think you wanted a little more lead up to that. It was just like he happened to be running down this hall and hid in his father's tomb, and surprise, Leviathan was there. It was very unexpected.
Yeah, I was not super into that.
Jared was not impressed.
That would have been a thing that, like, if Cone had discovered it and been like, you need to see this.
Yeah.
Or, like, if someone else in the family...
I could take that.
Just... I don't know. Raken, it's weird because he didn't really have much agency throughout this whole book.
Yeah.
But when he gets agency, it feels undeserved.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a shock.
It's a little weird.
Yeah.
This whole ending with, it's all like big night battles.
Yeah.
Leviathan gathers up, the few remaining non-corrupted knights and armigers.
And like seeing Leviathan in battle makes all of the actual soldiers on the ground, feel empowered, and so they turn the tide of this battle, and long story short, they're winning.
I don't know. I did not appreciate, like,
you weren't in love with the end.
So it's funny because the real end, like the true epilogue, I did enjoy all of that.
Okay.
In the end, Rath decides we're going to split the kill. So each one of them gets a third of the kill. To which Sycorax and Cone are like, no one is going to accept that.
Yeah.
Like, our temples are going to fight over this kill for decades.
Yeah.
It's like,
also,
I don't
none
care.
of us killed any. They didn't actually kill the king.
Yeah. And then what we find out is Cone goes off on her own.
Yes.
So it was mentioned a little bit, but all three of these assassins, in one way or another, are unwanted by their temples.
Yes.
Cone doesn't want to be, like, the Vindicator Temple doesn't want to give Cone away once he gets his 50th kill.
Yep.
Sycorax, they feel, is, corrupted because of a previous mission. Cone, similarly, interfaced with a sort of dark mechanicum, like techno-virus that's talked about. And so there's concerns that she's corrupted. So they're all supposedly on their last mission. Yeah. And it definitely colors their relationship a bit.
Yeah, and it ends sort of on a cliffhanger for Cone. She is in search of something related to a previous mission, and she doesn't want her temple to know where she is, so she kind of disappears.
She fakes her own death.
She fakes her own death, right? Yeah.
Yep.
And so she's gone, and we get a little bit of that, and so I'm hoping there's a second book, because I would read that book.
Yeah, and based on the title, I think it's going to be called Assassinorum, name of the operation. This mission was called Operation Kingmaker. Yeah. And I could see that being the format for this book.
Yeah, overall I enjoyed this book, despite you not liking the end.
Oh, yeah. Like, everything leading up to it. The first 3/4 of this book are absolute gold. And it's so good that I still hold to a 9 out of 10.
Yep.
Despite not being
I didn't hate the end. I thought it was all right. I do agree with you that some of those loose ends could have been a little bit smoother. Yeah. But I would say that the characters are great. The plot is really intriguing. There's a lot of twists that we didn't talk about like people maybe being dead, but then not being dead. Aside from the king, who's actually dead. So I think it does a good job of being like a really great sort of heist-ish film in my mind.
It feels so different from other Black Library books.
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm thinking, like, is it because Robert Rath is American?
Maybe.
Like, I know he's an American writer, and so most of the Black Library authors are not.
I know.
And I just wonder if...
Maybe.
I don't know what it is, but oh my God, am I looking forward to his books going forward.
It was super great.
Yeah.
We give it a 9 out of 10.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
That's it for us. We're back next time with...
it's a little complicated.
No, it's definitely going to be Siege of
Are
Terra.
you sure? Because
yes.
I'm finishing up Path of the Dark Eldar, and you're reading Clone Lord, and we're listening to the new Angron Red Angel book. We already listened to the Alfarius
Primarch book,
right?
But I really want it to be Siege of Terra. I'm really about Horus versus the Emperor.
So, I do have a copy of The End and the Death, Part 1.
Yes.
And that will likely be our next episode.
Maybe we'll just do small ones about the other one. That's fine.
We'll be covering The Siege of Terra, Book 8, Part 1, The End and the Death.
All right. See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.